Yokoso owashitare, and welcome back to the second and final part of the great granddaddy of all kaiju stories. If you haven't seen part 1, please go check that out, because if you don't watch that, you won't know what's going on, and that has some very important, necessary context, but I won't get into a long preamble. If you like Japanese history, Japanese culture, storytelling, etc., please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel, because there are plenty more stories where this one comes from, and let's just hop right into it where we left off. And where we left off exactly was with this band of 7 fishermen. Having been blown out to sea, they stumbled upon an island where they met a mysterious man who gave them lots and lots of really good food that was apparently so good that they were willing to risk their very lives in aid of this mysterious man and help him fight his longtime enemy, who was supposed to show up soon. And so, after agreeing to this, and after finishing all their preparations, the 7 fishermen partied all night and waited for the hour of the snake of the next day. The hour of the snake being in modern times the time between 9 and 11 a.m. And so the time came, and these fishermen waited, gazing out into the direction that their host, who at the time was not with them, had said that the enemy was going to be coming from, far across the sea. And for a while there was no hint or sign about an enemy arriving. No ships, no armies, nothing. Until suddenly, an unnatural and ominous gust of wind kicked up from somewhere out to sea and washed over these fishermen, sending a chill down their spines. And that's when one of them shouted, "Look! Out at sea! Something's happening in the water!" And when the men all focused their gaze for a bit, they noticed that something was churning in the depths. But also, there was this unearthly glow just below the surface of the water. And then suddenly, out from where this disturbance was going on, 2 massive jets of flame sprang up and flashed across their vision. Before the men had the chance to even ask what the heck that even was, there was another gust of wind that came down from the mountain behind them that shook every leaf and bent every blade of grass around them. And just like what happened at sea, 2 pillars of flame erupted from somewhere in the mountains, the source of which none of them could see, but it shocked them to their very cores. Turning back to the ocean, they finally saw exactly what their enemy was. It was an unbelievably gigantic centipede that they guessed, if my calculations are right anyway, to be around 100 feet long, that slowly and ominously and grotesquely, just gross, crawled out of the sea and onto land, and slowly began making its way toward the mountain. Just then, a red glow from the mountain behind them drew the fishermen's attention there once more, and they saw an equally gigantic snake suddenly emerge from the rocks and trees, its gargantuan tongue flickering in and out of its incredible maw. And so, these titans locked eyes, both staring at each other for a moment. The snake on the high ground atop a small cliff, the centipede down close to the beach. Now, I don't need to say that at this point the fishermen were aghast in fear, but the text does say that, so I'm going to say it here too. So after this short stare down between these monsters, the snake moved off to the side a little bit, very clearly making space for the centipede to climb the cliff, which the centipede, seemingly spurred on by malicious glee, did. He scrambled up the side in a blink, and then once again he stared down his foe. Both these monsters glared at each other for a moment, and the fishermen could feel their wrath rising, and they also began climbing the cliff as instructed by the man from yesterday to take up their positions. No sooner had they done so, and readied their bows, when the centipede charged the snake, and these 2 behemoths began tearing at each other with their teeth, twisting and coiling together, thrashing around, blood covering the floor as it streamed from vicious wounds. It soon became apparent that the centipede with its myriad stabbing legs was gaining the upper hand, and yet for about 2 hours, these titans fought with tooth and muscle, probably laying everything to waste around them as they careened and crashed atop of this cliff. And they did this until the snake, who very clearly was exhausted, beaten, bloodied, and bruised, turned its gaze toward the fishermen. And somehow, these men just intuitively understood what this snake was saying to them, and they remembered what the man said to them from yesterday. and it seemed to say with just its eyes, "Now, shoot him." The fisherman, despite being still terrified, dutifully and with zero hesitation unleashed a rain of arrows, sticking the centipede from head to tail with all the sharpened arrows in their possession. And when the arrows had been depleted, they each drew their swords and charged, hacking off as many of the centipede's legs as they could get close to. And now, having lost most of its limbs, the centipede fell, unable to keep itself upright, and tried its best to crawl away to safety. But, having no real way of resisting and being so far inland, much further inland than he was used to being, the fisherman ran this centipede down and began hacking it to pieces until it completely stopped moving altogether. Now, with the battle over, the giant injured snake slowly and laboriously retreated back into the depths of the mountains and disappeared. And after what seemed like a long time, the man that the fisherman had met yesterday showed up once more, walking out of the mountains. Only this time he was very clearly struggling to walk. His breathing was labored and hard, and the color had almost completely drained from his face. But, despite looking absolutely terrible, he had once again brought with him loads of some of the finest foods these fishermen had ever seen. And he was actually grinning from ear to ear, very clearly thrilled despite his wounds. After the men had eaten their fill once more, they then set about cutting down some of the surrounding trees and piling up as much of the centipede carcass as they could. They burned it to cinders. The remaining ash and chitin they took far away and disposed of. Once all of this work had been finished and everyone finally had a moment to rest, the mysterious man called the fishermen together and told them, "Good sirs, because of your bravery and virtue, I have brought peace to my island at last. I cannot express how happy I am because of you. On this island there are countless places perfectly suitable to raise crops, as well as many trees bearing fruit and plenty of game to hunt. It truly is a blessed island in just about everything. And so I ask you, sirs, how would you like to continue living on this island as a reward for your valiant service?" At first, the men weren't sure how to answer, and they told their host, "It certainly is a fine island, sir, and your offer is wonderful, but what would we do about our families? We still have our wives and our children back home." The man only smiled and said, "Well, I would be happy to send you back so you can bring them here." The men, of course, then replied, "But how are we supposed to get back to the mainland? We have no idea where this island is or where to go in order to get back." The man, still smiling, then said, "Ah, that's simple. I will put a wind at your backs to speed you back home, and when you're ready to come back here, simply go to the Kumada shrine in Kaga. It's a shrine that's dedicated to me. If you make an offering there, I will then whip up another wind to bring you and your families here safely." And, with everything being explained, the men all decided with one accord that that's exactly what they would do. And so, they set about storing food and making other preparations for a return journey. Once they had everything packed into the boat again, and had struck out a little ways from shore, a warm, strong, comforting wind seemed to come out of nowhere and sped their boat onward. And they arrived back at their familiar fishing waters within the span of an ancient Japanese hour, which in our time is actually more like 2 hours. So each of these fishermen arrived back at their several houses, explained everything to their families, and got everybody hyped about moving to this new island. But this wasn't modern America where you can just move somewhere if you have the means to do so. There were lots of laws and regulations in place that were meant to keep peasants in one place. So these fishermen and their families all stole away in the dead of night. They prepared 7 ships, loaded with seeds for planting crops and all other tools needed to build a new life, and they all headed for the shrine at Kumada. They paid their respects to the god there, explained their situation. I'm guessing basically they probably just stood in front of the main hall of the shrine and talked to it like there was a god present. The text just says they told the situation. Then, having done that, they all got into their boats and were promptly sped away by a strong wind that suddenly blew in out of seemingly nowhere. And all 7 of the ships safely made it to this new island. And so the 7 fishermen all set about building new lives there. They built homes, planted fields, had babies, lots and lots of babies, and soon the population grew and prospered beyond counting. And that island is today, or rather at the time of this story was written down, known as Nekonoshima or Nekojima, which means Cat Island. Don't really know what cats have to do about it, but okay, sure. Now the word was that once a year, people from that island would arrive in Kaga province and hold a festival at the Kumara Shrine. And although the people of Kaga had tried multiple times to investigate this festival and these people and go and see for themselves what the whole thing was about, whenever they went to go see, they could never find a single person. Even when they showed up in the middle of the night to try to take these people by surprise in their celebrations, they always seemed to have left for the island just before the investigators could get there. But there always were clear signs that people had been there, and that they had only just left. Apparently though, by the time this story was written down, these celebrations had been abandoned, so it will always remain a mystery. Furthermore, the story claims that if you're in the province of Noto, and in a specific district of that province, there's a place called Omiya, from which you can actually see that very island on a clear day. Its mountains standing tall way off in the western horizon. On top of that, in the very same province of Noto, there's a boatman by the name of Tsunemitsu. I think that's how you say his name, I'm not entirely sure. But anyway, this Tsunemitsu apparently was caught up in a wind and blown off to that island a while back. The people of course came out to see him, but they didn't let him any further inland than he needed to be and kept him near the beach. They gave him food and supplies and supported him for about a week until an opposing wind whipped up, and then they sent him back to Noto. Tsunemitsu supposedly then told everyone who would listen that he did manage to get a glimpse at parts of the island and that there was loads of homes, so much so that it rivaled any provincial capital and had a main thoroughfare just like the bigger cities in Japan at the time, with a population too big for him to count. And although he really wanted to better understand the lay of the land, they, the people of the island, unfortunately, did not allow him to see more. In more recent times meaning times when this story was first written down, Chinese sailors had been stopping at that island along their trade routes, and they would resupply there before they moved on to Tsuruga. But these Chinese merchants have an agreement with the people of Nekojima or Nekonoshima to not tell anyone outside what goes on there. And so, the story ends by stating that, if you really think about it, there was certainly some sort of karmic influence that led these 7 unassuming fishermen to find this island and populate the whole thing with their descendants for generations. And thus is it said that life on that island is a simple and an easy life. And that is the end of the story. Again, I really enjoy this story, and you can see why I think that this may be the great ancestor of all kaiju stories. It's stories about big, gigantic monsters fighting each other out on an island out at sea, where big monsters are likely to be hiding. And I also want to point out that both snakes and centipedes actually feature very heavily in Japanese mythology. Snakes are usually a sign, a good omen, signs of prosperity. In fact, in modern Japan, what some people will do is, in America, we have a lucky rabbit's foot that people will oftentimes carry around with them. What they do in Japan is they actually find bits of shedded snake skin, and they put that in their wallet, and that's supposed to invite good fortune and luck to them and help make their wallets thicker. Centipedes, on the other hand, as you can tell, centipedes are not something that the Japanese tend to enjoy. They're dangerous, they bite you and it hurts. I don't know if the centipedes in Japan are particularly deadly, but I know they can get really flippin' huge. And in mythology, centipedes are generally bad and you don't want to be around them, and signs of decay and death and things like that. See the story about Susanoo having centipedes in his hair, or trying to get Okuninushi to stay in a room full of centipedes in an attempt to get him dead. But anyways, that's all the cultural commentary I have. Again, I really enjoyed this story. It was a really good one. And if you liked this story, please don't forget to give the video a like. Please subscribe to the channel because there are plenty more stories where this one came from. And share with your weeb friends, your story-loving friends. Just get the word out if you would be so kind. And hopefully we will see you here for the next story, which is another story about how the population of an island came about. But let's just say this island was populated because of the result of the breaking of a taboo. Of a really, really bad taboo. Let's just say that if you watch Game of Thrones, the Lannisters would have some competition with what happens here. Anyway, with all of that being said, if you've been watching all the way up to this point, I thank you sincerely. Ito katajike no koso haberi kere, and hopefully we will see you for the next one. In the meantime, have a good one, guys. Goodbye.